Marcus Whitmore III had everything money could buy, except the one thing he wanted most: the ability to walk. The 28-year-old heir to the Whitmore pharmaceutical empire sat in his custom Italian wheelchair, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. His father's company had developed treatments for countless ailments, but none could repair the spinal damage from the car accident that had changed his life 5 years ago. The accident had happened on a rainy October evening. Marcus had been racing his Lamborghini through the winding roads of the Hamptons, showing off for his then-girlfriend Sophia. The car had spun out on a sharp curve, slamming into an oak tree that had stood for over a century. Sophia had walked away with minor cuts. Marcus had not walked away at all. Since then, his world had shrunk to the confines of his luxury prison. His friends had gradually stopped visiting, uncomfortable with his condition and their own helplessness. His family treated him with a mixture of pity and frustration. His father, Marcus Whitmore Jr., had thrown money at every possible treatment: experimental surgeries in Switzerland, stem cell therapy in Germany, cutting-edge rehabilitation programs in Japan. Nothing had worked. The family employed a small army of staff to care for Marcus and maintain their various properties. There was Mrs. Henderson, the stern British housekeeper who had worked for the family for 20 years. James, the butler who spoke in whispers and moved like a ghost through the apartment. Dr. Patricia Morris, the live-in physician who monitored Marcus's health and managed his medications. And then there was the newest addition to their staff, a woman whose presence had somehow gone unnoticed by everyone except Marcus himself. Her name was Keisha Washington, and she had been working as a maid in the Whitmore household for only 3 months. Unlike the other staff members who had been carefully vetted through expensive agencies, Keisha had come through a different route. She had been working at the rehabilitation center where Marcus had spent 6 grueling months after his accident, and Mrs. Henderson had hired her almost as an afterthought when their previous cleaning woman had retired. What struck Marcus about Keisha was not her quiet efficiency or her respectful demeanor, qualities that all the Whitmore staff possessed. It was something else entirely. While other staff members averted their eyes when they encountered him, speaking to him in the careful, patronizing tones reserved for invalids, Keisha treated him like a person. Not a wealthy person, not a disabled person, just a person. She was in her early 30s with natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and kind eyes that seemed to see everything. She moved through the apartment with purpose, cleaning and organizing with a methodical precision that impressed even Mrs. Henderson. But Marcus noticed things others missed: the way Keisha's hands moved when she thought no one was watching, stretching and flexing her fingers in specific patterns. The way she sometimes paused while dusting, her eyes distant as if she were calculating something complex. The medical textbooks she carried in her cleaning cart, hidden beneath towels and supplies. One afternoon in late November, Marcus was having one of his darker days. The first snow of winter was falling outside, reminding him of all the activities he could no longer enjoy. Skiing in Aspen, ice skating in Rockefeller Center, even simple walks through snow-covered parks. His physical therapy session that morning had been particularly frustrating. Dr. Morris had put him through the usual routine of exercises designed to maintain muscle tone and prevent complications, but they both knew it was largely futile. "Your muscle atrophy is progressing as expected," Dr. Morris had said in her clinical tone. "We need to increase the frequency of your passive range of motion exercises." "Expected," Marcus had muttered bitterly. "Everything about this is so damn expected." Dr. Morris had adjusted her glasses and made notes on her tablet. She was competent and professional, but she had given up any hope of real recovery long ago. Her job now was simply maintenance, keeping Marcus healthy enough to inherit his father's empire, even if he would run it from a wheelchair. That afternoon, while Dr. Morris was attending a medical conference downtown, Marcus was alone in his room when he heard a soft knock on his door. This was unusual. The staff typically entered without knocking, treating him more like a piece of furniture than the master of the house. "Come in," he called. Keisha entered, carrying her usual cleaning supplies, but she paused just inside the doorway. "Mr. Marcus, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you feeling all right today? You seem troubled." Marcus looked at her with surprise. None of the staff ever inquired about his emotional state. "I'm fine," he said automatically, then caught himself. Something about Keisha's genuine concern made him reconsider. "Actually, no. I'm not fine. I'm having what you might call an existential crisis." Keisha set down her cleaning cart and moved closer, but she didn't approach with the careful, hovering manner that everyone else used around his wheelchair. Instead, she pulled up a chair and sat down at his level, meeting his eyes directly. "Tell me about it," she said simply. For the next hour, Marcus found himself talking more openly than he had in years. He told her about the frustration of being treated like a child, about the loneliness of his existence, about the crushing weight of knowing that his condition would never improve. Keisha listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that surprised him with their depth. "You know," she said finally, "there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you, but I wasn't sure if it was my place." "What's that?" "I've been observing your care routine, and I think there might be some approaches that aren't being tried, things that could help with your mobility and strength." Marcus felt a familiar surge of irritation. "Look, Keisha, I appreciate your concern, but I've had the best doctors in the world examine me. I've tried every treatment available. My spine is damaged beyond repair." "I understand that," Keisha said calmly. "But I'm not talking about repairing your spine. I'm talking about working with what you have." Something in her tone made Marcus pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean that incomplete spinal cord injuries aren't always as absolute as people think. Sometimes there are neural pathways that can be developed, muscles that can be strengthened in ways that conventional therapy doesn't address." Marcus stared at her. "Are you a doctor?" "No," Keisha said. "But I am a licensed physical therapist with a specialty in spinal cord rehabilitation. I also have a master's degree in exercise physiology, and I'm currently working on my doctorate in neuromuscular therapy." The room fell silent except for the soft sound of snow tapping against the windows. Marcus felt as though the world had tilted slightly off its axis. "You're a physical therapist," he said slowly, "with a master's degree, working as a maid." "Working as a maid to pay for my doctorate program," Keisha corrected. "And to gain practical experience with different types of cases. The Whitmore family pays very well, and the schedule allows me to attend classes and do research." Marcus's mind raced. "Why didn't you say anything before? Why didn't Mrs. Henderson mention your qualifications when she hired you?" "Because she didn't ask about my qualifications," Keisha said matter-of-factly. "She needed a maid. I needed a job. My educational background wasn't relevant to cleaning bathrooms and dusting furniture. But it's extremely relevant to my condition." "Yes," Keisha agreed. "But it wasn't my place to offer unsolicited medical advice. You have a team of expensive doctors managing your care. I'm here to clean your house." Marcus felt a surge of anger, but it wasn't directed at Keisha. It was directed at the system that had allowed a highly qualified therapist to be overlooked simply because she was hired to perform a different function. It was directed at his own assumptions and those of his family. "What would you do differently?" he asked quietly. Keisha was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. "I would start by doing a comprehensive assessment of your current function. Not just your medical records, but hands-on evaluation of your muscle strength, your sensation, your reflexes. I've been watching you move around this apartment for 3 months, and I see things that suggest your injury might not be as complete as your doctors believe." "Like what?" "Like the way you unconsciously shift your weight in your chair when you're concentrating." Like the slight movement in your left leg when you're frustrated. I've seen it happen 3 times now. Like the fact that you still have excellent upper body strength and coordination, which suggests your neural pathways aren't completely severed. Marcus felt his heart begin to race. Dr. Morris says those are just involuntary muscle spasms, meaningless reflexes. Maybe they are, Keisha said, but maybe they're not. The only way to know for sure would be to do proper testing and try some alternative therapy approaches. What kind of approaches? Functional electrical stimulation, intensive strength training with specific protocols, balance and coordination work that most traditional therapy programs skip. Aquatic therapy done properly, not just gentle pool exercises. And most importantly, mental conditioning that treats you like someone who can improve, not someone who needs to be managed. Marcus felt a dangerous flutter of hope in his chest, a feeling he had trained himself to suppress over the past 5 years. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and disappointment was harder to bear than resigned acceptance. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because I've been watching you give up," Keisha said quietly, "and I don't think you have to." Before Marcus could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Keisha quickly stood up and returned to her cleaning cart. "Think about what I said," she whispered as she began dusting the bookshelf. "But understand that if we try this, it won't be easy, it won't be comfortable, and there are no guarantees." Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. "Keisha, you're behind schedule. The family is expecting guests for dinner tonight." "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. I'll finish up here right away." As Keisha left the room, Marcus sat in stunned silence. For the first time in years, he felt as though he were standing at a crossroads. He could continue down the path he had been on, comfortable, predictable, hopeless, or he could take a leap of faith with a woman who saw possibility where everyone else saw limitation. That evening, during dinner with his parents and their business associates, Marcus found himself studying the faces around the table. These were people who controlled billions of dollars, who made decisions that affected thousands of lives, who were considered brilliant in their respective fields. Yet none of them had thought to ask about the qualifications of their household staff beyond their ability to perform basic tasks. His father was discussing a new drug compound that showed promise for treating neurological conditions. The irony was not lost on Marcus. Here was a man who had spent millions trying to find a cure for his son's condition, while potentially ignoring a qualified therapist who was cleaning their floors. After dinner, Marcus returned to his room and sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness. For 5 years, he had accepted the verdict of the medical establishment. His condition was permanent. His mobility would never improve. His best option was to focus on adapting to his limitations. But Keisha had planted a seed of doubt. What if the experts were wrong? What if their resignation had become a self-fulfilling prophecy? What if the quiet woman who cleaned his bathroom saw something that the renowned specialists had missed? Marcus spent the night reading everything he could find online about incomplete spinal cord injuries, alternative therapy approaches, and recovery cases that had defied medical expectations. Most of what he found was either overly technical or obviously fraudulent. Miracle cures and snake oil salesmen preying on desperate people like himself. But scattered throughout the medical literature were intriguing case studies, patients who had regained function years after their injuries, new therapeutic approaches that showed promise, research suggesting that the spinal cord's capacity for healing and adaptation was greater than previously understood. As dawn broke over Central Park, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He was going to take Keisha up on her offer, regardless of what his doctors, his family, or anyone else thought about it. He had nothing left to lose, and for the first time in 5 years, he had something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. The next morning, Marcus waited until Dr. Morris left for her daily rounds at the hospital before approaching Keisha. He found her in the library, methodically organizing the medical journals that his father collected but rarely read. When she saw him wheel himself into the room, she paused in her work. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Marcus began without preamble. "I want to try it. Whatever program you have in mind, I'm willing to attempt it." Keisha set down the journal she was holding and studied his face carefully. "Are you sure? Because once we start, I'm going to push you harder than anyone has pushed you since your accident. I'm going to ask you to do things that will be uncomfortable, frustrating, and sometimes painful." "I'm sure," Marcus said, though his voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. "And what about your family? Dr. Morris? They're not going to be happy about this arrangement." Marcus had been dreading this question. "I'll handle them. But I want to ask you something first. Why are you willing to risk your job for this? You don't owe me anything." Keisha was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently straightening an already neat stack of magazines. "When I was 12 years old, my grandmother had a stroke. The doctor said she would never walk again, never speak clearly, never be independent. But my grandmother was stubborn. She worked with a physical therapist at the community center who believed in her recovery." She paused, a small smile crossing her face. "It took 2 years, but my grandmother proved those doctors wrong. She lived independently for another 15 years. She taught me that sometimes the difference between recovery and resignation is having someone who believes in your potential." "And you believe in mine?" "I believe in what I've observed. I believe in evidence-based therapy, and I believe that you've been underestimated by people who should know better." That afternoon, they began with what Keisha called a baseline assessment. She had Marcus transfer from his wheelchair to a therapy mat that she had somehow managed to procure and install in the unused guest room at the far end of the apartment. The process was more thorough and intensive than any evaluation he had undergone in years. Keisha tested his reflexes with scientific precision, mapped areas of sensation and numbness, measured muscle strength with calibrated equipment, and conducted flexibility assessments that revealed limitations he hadn't known existed. She worked with the focused intensity of a researcher, gathering critical data, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking questions that made him think about his body in new ways. "When you feel tingling in your legs, how would you describe it?" she asked, manipulating his left ankle through a range of motion. "Like static electricity." "I suppose. Dr. Morris says it's just nerve damage." "Nerve damage that's healing, maybe," Keisha said, making a note. "Can you feel this?" She pressed firmly against a spot on his calf. Marcus concentrated. "Barely. It's very faint." "That's more sensation than you had 6 months ago, according to your medical records." Marcus stared at her. "You've read my medical records." "I asked Mrs. Henderson for access to them when I first started working here. I told her I needed to understand your medical needs in case of emergency." Keisha didn't look up from her notes. "What I found were records that showed gradual improvement in several areas, improvements that were being dismissed as measurement error or temporary fluctuations." Improvement? Marcus felt that dangerous flutter of hope again. Small improvements. Incremental changes that individually don't mean much, but collectively suggest that your nervous system is still adapting and healing. The question is whether we can accelerate and direct that process. By the end of the first session, Marcus was exhausted in a way he hadn't experienced since his early rehabilitation days. Keisha had put him through exercises that were completely different from his routine with Dr. Morris. Instead of gentle, passive movements designed to prevent complications, these were active challenges that demanded everything his body could give. "Tomorrow we start the real work," Keisha said as she helped him back into his wheelchair. "Today was just the assessment." Marcus laughed, though it came out as more of a gasp. "That was just the assessment?" "That was me figuring out what you can do. Tomorrow I start teaching you to do things you think you can't do." The next morning brought their first real conflict. Dr. Morris arrived for Marcus's regular session and found him already dressed in workout clothes, waiting in the guest room instead of his bedroom. "Marcus, what is this? You're not scheduled for therapy until this afternoon, and why are you in here?" Before Marcus could answer, Keisha entered carrying a set of parallel bars that she had assembled from portable equipment. Dr. Morris looked at her with confusion and growing alarm. "Excuse me, but what is that equipment for?" "Physical therapy?" Keisha said simply, continuing to set up the bars with practiced efficiency. "I beg your pardon?" Dr. Morris's voice rose in pitch. "I am Mr. Whitmore's physician and physical therapist. I didn't authorize any additional equipment." Marcus took a deep breath. "Dr. Morris, I'd like you to meet Keisha Washington. She's a licensed physical therapist with advanced training in spinal cord rehabilitation. I've asked her to supplement your care with some additional therapy approaches." Dr. Morris looked as though she had been slapped. "Mr. Whitmore, this is highly irregular. I cannot be responsible for your care if unauthorized personnel are providing medical treatment." "Then perhaps we should discuss this with my father," Marcus said quietly. The standoff that followed was uncomfortable for everyone involved. Dr. Morris made it clear that she considered this arrangement unprofessional and potentially dangerous. Keisha remained calm but firm, producing her credentials and explaining her qualifications in language that even Dr. Morris couldn't dismiss. "I have no intention of interfering with your medical management," Keisha said respectfully. "I'm simply offering complementary therapy focused on functional improvement." "Functional improvement?" Dr. Morris scoffed. "Mr. Whitmore's injury is well documented. His prognosis was established years ago by some of the finest specialists in the country." "Prognoses aren't promises," Keisha replied. "They're educated guesses based on available information. New information can change the picture." The debate might have continued indefinitely if Marcus hadn't intervened. "Dr. Morris, I appreciate your concern for my welfare, but I'm an adult, and I have the right to seek additional opinions and treatments. If you're not comfortable with this arrangement, we can discuss alternative care options." The implied threat was clear. Dr. Morris made excellent money caring for Marcus, and she knew that the Whitmore family's influence could make or break a medical career in New York. After a tense moment, she nodded stiffly. "Very well, but I want it clearly understood that I cannot be held responsible for any setbacks or complications resulting from this supplemental therapy." "Understood," Marcus said. Once Dr. Morris left, Keisha turned to Marcus with a serious expression. "You realize you just burned a bridge there. If this doesn't work, she's going to spend the rest of your life saying, 'I told you so.'" "If this doesn't work, she'll be right," Marcus replied. "So let's make sure it works." The program Keisha designed was unlike anything Marcus had ever attempted. It was based on principles of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections, and progressive overload, gradually increasing demands on his neuromuscular system to force adaptation. The parallel bars became his nemesis and his salvation. Keisha had him attempting to bear weight on his legs for seconds at a time, supported by his arms and the bars. The first few attempts were failures. His legs simply wouldn't support any weight, and he would collapse back into his wheelchair feeling defeated. But Keisha was relentless in her encouragement and precise in her adjustments. She modified his position, changed his grip, altered the angle of his approach. She used functional electrical stimulation to activate dormant muscle groups, timing the stimulation with his voluntary effort to reinforce neural pathways. "Your brain needs to remember how to talk to these muscles," she explained during one particularly frustrating session. "We're essentially teaching them a language they've forgotten." Progress came in increments so small they were barely measurable, a tenth of a second longer bearing weight, a slight increase in muscle activation during electrical stimulation, a reflexive response that seemed more controlled than random. After 2 weeks of daily sessions, Marcus was beginning to doubt himself. The improvements Keisha claimed to see were invisible to him. He felt stronger, more flexible, more aware of his body, but he couldn't see any functional change that mattered. Then came the morning that changed everything. Marcus was attempting his usual weight-bearing exercise on the parallel bars. Keisha was spotting him, ready to catch him if he fell, when something extraordinary happened. Instead of collapsing immediately, Marcus felt his left leg respond to his mental command. For just a moment, perhaps 2 seconds, his leg actually supported a portion of his weight. He looked at Keisha in shock. She was grinning broadly, but she didn't seem surprised. "I felt that," he whispered. "I actually felt my leg supporting me." "I saw it too," Keisha said. "Your left quadriceps fired on command. That's not a reflex or a spasm. That's voluntary muscle control." Marcus felt tears welling in his eyes. For 5 years, he had been told that voluntary control below his injury site was impossible. Yet he had just experienced it firsthand. "Does this mean I'll walk again?" he asked, his voice shaking with emotion. Keisha's expression became more cautious. "It means your injury isn't as complete as everyone thought. It means you have functional neural pathways that can be developed. Whether that translates into walking, we'll have to see. But Marcus, what just happened shouldn't have been possible according to your diagnosis." Word of this breakthrough somehow reached Marcus's father, though Marcus had been careful not to share details of his new therapy program. Marcus Whitmore, Jr. arrived at the apartment that evening in a state of controlled fury. "I understand you've been experimenting with alternative treatments," his father said without preamble as he entered Marcus's study. "I've been exploring additional therapy options," Marcus replied carefully. "With the Maid." The way his father said "the Maid" made it clear what he thought of the arrangement. Marcus felt his own anger rising. "With a licensed physical therapist who has advanced training in spinal cord rehabilitation," he corrected. "A physical therapist who works as domestic help because she can't find proper employment in her field," his father shot back. "Marcus, do you have any idea how this looks? We've spent millions on your care. The finest specialists in the world have evaluated your condition, and now you're taking advice from someone who cleans toilets for a living. Someone who sees potential where your expensive specialists see only limitations," Marcus replied. "Someone who's achieved more progress in 2 weeks than your medical team has achieved in 5 years. Marcus Whitmore, Jr. was not accustomed to being challenged by his son, and the conversation quickly escalated into a full argument. The older man threatened to fire Keisha, to cut off Marcus's access to family resources, to have him declared incompetent if necessary. "You're gambling with your health based on false hope," he shouted. "This woman is giving you unrealistic expectations that will only lead to greater disappointment." "This woman is giving me the first realistic hope I've had since my accident," Marcus shouted back. "And if you fire her, I'll leave. I'll move out of this apartment, out from under your control, and pursue my recovery independently." It was an empty threat. Marcus had no practical way to live independently, but it was delivered with enough conviction that his father paused. "You would throw away everything this family has provided for you? The best medical care, financial security, a comfortable life?" "I would trade a comfortable life for any chance at a meaningful one." The argument ended in stalemate, but Marcus knew he had bought himself time, not resolution. His father would find other ways to undermine his therapy with Keisha, more subtle approaches that would be harder to resist. That night, Marcus called Keisha to warn her about the growing opposition to their work together. "I expected this," she said calmly. "Rich families don't like having their assumptions challenged by people they consider beneath them." "You're not beneath anyone," Marcus said firmly. "Your qualifications speak for themselves." "My qualifications don't matter if I'm not allowed to use them. Marcus, you need to understand something. If your family decides to get rid of me, they will. I can be replaced with a phone call." "Then what do we do?" There was a long pause before Keisha answered. "We accelerate the program. We push harder and faster than I originally planned. We try to achieve enough measurable progress that it becomes impossible for them to dismiss what we're doing. Is that safe? Probably not, Keisha admitted. But playing it safe hasn't gotten you anywhere in 5 years. Sometimes you have to take risks to create change. Marcus closed his eyes and made another decision that would alter the course of his life. Then let's take the risk. Let's show them what's possible when someone refuses to accept limitations as final answers. The conversation ended with both of them understanding that they were entering a more dangerous phase of their partnership. The stakes were higher now. Not just Marcus's physical recovery, but both of their futures hung in the balance. As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just 2 weeks. For years, he had been a passive recipient of care, a problem to be managed rather than a person with potential. Keisha had awakened something in him that he thought was gone forever, the belief that he could be more than his limitations suggested. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, greater risks, and hopefully, greater rewards. But for the first time in 5 years, Marcus was looking forward to tomorrow instead of simply enduring it. The accelerated program that Keisha implemented was grueling beyond anything Marcus had imagined possible. They began working twice daily, intensive sessions in the morning and evening, with shorter maintenance exercises throughout the day. Keisha had somehow acquired additional equipment, including a sophisticated electrical stimulation unit and a standing frame that allowed Marcus to work on weight-bearing exercises for extended periods. "Where did you get all this equipment?" Marcus asked during their 3rd week of accelerated therapy. "I have connections at the rehabilitation center where I used to work," Keisha replied, adjusting the electrical stimulation pads on his legs. "Some of it I'm borrowing, some I bought with my own money." "You bought therapy equipment with your own money? For me?" "I bought an investment in both our futures," she said matter-of-factly. "If this works, it validates my research and my methods. If it doesn't work, I'll return what I can and write off the loss." Marcus was struck by the matter-of-fact way she discussed risking her own financial resources for his recovery. None of his expensive specialists had ever invested their own money in his progress. They collected their fees regardless of outcomes. The results of the intensified program began to show within days. The moments of weight-bearing support grew from seconds to tens of seconds. Marcus began to experience what Keisha called motor sparks, brief instances where his brain's commands to his legs were clearly received and partially executed. His left leg showed more response than his right, but both limbs were demonstrating activity that had been absent for years. More importantly, Marcus was beginning to feel sensations that went beyond the vague tingling he had grown accustomed to. He could distinguish between different types of pressure, detect changes in temperature, and sometimes even feel pain, a sensation that, paradoxically, filled him with joy because it meant his nerves were functioning. "Pain is information," Keisha explained when he mentioned this to her. "Your nervous system is trying to tell you something. We need to listen to what it's saying and respond appropriately." The breakthrough moment came on a Thursday morning in their 4th week of working together. Marcus was in the standing frame, supported by straps and braces, working on shifting his weight from one leg to the other. It was an exercise he had been practicing for days with minimal success. Then, without warning, his right leg responded to his mental command with startling clarity. Not only did it support his weight, but it actually moved in the direction he intended. For almost 10 seconds, Marcus stood in the frame, supporting most of his own weight on both legs. Keisha whooped with excitement, a sound so uncharacteristic of her usual professional demeanor that Marcus began laughing. When he tried to repeat the movement, he couldn't maintain it for more than a few seconds, but the fact that it had happened at all was revolutionary. "We need to document this," Keisha said, pulling out her phone to record video. "We need evidence of what just happened." "Why?" Because your family is going to demand proof and your doctors are going to claim it's impossible. She helped him back into his wheelchair, her hands shaking slightly with excitement. Marcus, what you just did shouldn't be possible with a complete spinal cord injury. We've just proven that your injury isn't complete. That afternoon, Dr. Morris arrived for Marcus's scheduled session and immediately noticed his elevated mood and energy. When she asked about his condition, Marcus couldn't contain his excitement. I stood today, he said simply. I supported my own weight and controlled my leg movement for 10 seconds. Dr. Morris looked at him with the patient expression of someone humoring a delusional patient. Marcus, I know you've been working with that woman, but you need to understand that what you think you experienced might not be what actually happened. Spinal cord patients sometimes develop false sensations or misinterpret reflexive movements as voluntary control. It wasn't a false sensation, Marcus said firmly, and I have it on video. Dr. Morris's expression changed from patient condescension to sharp concern. You have what on video? Keisha chose that moment to enter the room, carrying the portfolio where she had been documenting Marcus's progress. Dr. Morris, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to discuss Mr. Whitmore's recent improvements with you. There have been no improvements, Dr. Morris said coldly. Mr. Whitmore's condition is stable, as it has been for years. Keisha calmly opened her portfolio and began laying out charts, graphs, and photographs documenting Marcus's progress. These measurements show significant increases in muscle activation, improved reflexes, and restored sensation in areas that were previously non-responsive. Dr. Morris glanced at the documents with barely concealed disdain. I don't know what kind of pseudoscientific measurements you're using, but they don't change the medical facts about spinal cord injuries. The medical facts are that Mr. Whitmore has an incomplete injury with preservation of some neural pathways, Keisha replied calmly. The previous assumption of complete injury was based on initial trauma assessment, not on ongoing evaluation of neural function. That's impossible. I've reviewed his case personally with specialists at Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic. Keisha pulled out her phone and showed Dr. Morris the video of Marcus's standing exercise. This was recorded this morning. As you can see, Mr. Whitmore is bearing weight on both legs and demonstrating voluntary muscle control in his right leg. Dr. Morris watched the video with growing alarm. When it ended, she looked at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. This is very concerning, she said finally. What you're showing me could be extremely dangerous. If Marcus is developing some restored function, inappropriate therapy could cause setbacks or further injury. Or appropriate therapy could maximize his recovery potential, Keisha countered. The argument that followed was heated and technical, with both women citing research studies, physiological principles, and treatment protocols. Marcus listened with fascination as two very different approaches to medicine clashed in his living room. Dr. Morris represented the conservative medical establishment, focused on preventing complications, managing symptoms, and accepting limitations. Keisha represented a more aggressive, evidence-based approach that challenged assumptions and pursued maximum recovery regardless of initial prognosis. The conflict came to a head when Dr. Morris announced that she was calling Marcus's father to discuss the situation. I have a professional responsibility to ensure that my patient is not being subjected to potentially harmful treatments by unqualified personnel, she said, her voice tight with anger. I am qualified, Keisha replied quietly, and my methods are producing results that your conservative approach has failed to achieve. Your methods are reckless and potentially dangerous. Your methods have kept him in a wheelchair for 5 years when he might have been walking. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Dr. Morris gathered her materials and left without another word, but Marcus knew she would follow through on her threat to contact his father. That evening, Marcus received a call that he had been dreading. His father was coming to the apartment the next morning, and he was bringing backup, Dr. Elizabeth Chen. one of the country's leading spinal cord specialists, and a representative from the family's legal team. "They're going to try to shut this down," Marcus told Keisha when she arrived for their evening session. "I know," she said calmly, "but we have 24 hours to prepare. How do you feel about taking a very big risk?" "What kind of risk?" Keisha outlined a plan that was both brilliant and terrifying. Instead of trying to defend their methods or argue about protocols, they would demonstrate results. She wanted to push Marcus's latest breakthrough to its limits, to show the assembled experts something that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. "I want to see if you can take steps," she said simply. Marcus felt his heart race. "Steps? Keisha, I don't think I'm ready for that." "You might not be ready, but your nervous system is. The weight-bearing you demonstrated this morning suggests that the neural pathways are there. We just need to activate them properly." They worked through the night, using every technique in Keisha's arsenal. Electrical stimulation to activate dormant muscles, intense strength training to build supporting muscle groups, balance exercises to retrain his proprioception. Most importantly, mental conditioning to help Marcus believe that walking was possible. By dawn, Marcus was exhausted but exhilarated. He had managed to take 3 halting, supported steps using the parallel bars. It wasn't walking in any conventional sense. He needed maximum support and electrical assistance, but it was voluntary, controlled movement of both legs in a coordinated pattern. "This is going to hurt," Keisha warned him as they prepared for the demonstration. "You're going to be using muscles that have been dormant for years. Your body is going to rebel against what we're asking it to do." "I don't care about the pain," Marcus said, and he meant it. "I care about proving that recovery is possible." The assembled experts arrived at precisely 10 o'clock. Marcus's father led the group, followed by Dr. Chen, a stern woman in her 50s with impeccable credentials, and Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer. Dr. Morris brought up the rear, her expression a mixture of vindication and concern. "Marcus," his father began without preamble, "we're here because Dr. Morris has expressed serious concerns about your current therapy program. And I'm here to show you why those concerns are unfounded," Marcus replied. He wheeled himself to the parallel bars that Keisha had set up in the center of the room. The assembled experts watched with skeptical expressions as Keisha attached the electrical stimulation electrodes and powered up her equipment. "What you're about to see," Keisha said, addressing the group with professional calm, "represents 4 weeks of intensive rehabilitation therapy using evidence-based protocols for incomplete spinal cord injury recovery." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Ms. Washington, I've reviewed Mr. Whitmore's original imaging and surgical reports. His injury was classified as complete at the T12 level. The likelihood of functional recovery is essentially 0. "Respectfully, Dr. Chen, initial injury classifications can be wrong," Keisha replied. "And even complete injuries can show improvement with appropriate therapy." "That's medically impossible," Dr. Morris interjected. "Then you'll want to watch closely," Marcus said, transferring from his wheelchair to the parallel bars. What followed was the most challenging physical effort of Marcus's life. With Keisha's coaching and electrical assistance, he slowly raised himself to a standing position. The assembled experts watched with growing amazement as he not only supported his own weight, but began to shift his weight from one foot to the other. "That's impossible," Dr. Morris whispered. But the impossible was just beginning. With tremendous effort and Keisha's constant encouragement, Marcus lifted his right foot and moved it forward 6 inches, then his left foot, then his right foot again. 3 steps, halting, supported, assisted, but undeniably 3 steps that he controlled with his own nervous system. The room fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing and the quiet hum of the electrical stimulation equipment. When he finally transferred back to his wheelchair, he looked at the assembled experts with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "5 years ago, you told me I would never walk again," he said to Dr. Chen. Today, I just proved you wrong. Dr. Chen moved closer, her professional skepticism warring with the evidence she had just witnessed. "May I examine you?" she asked quietly. For the next hour, Dr. Chen conducted the most thorough neurological examination Marcus had received since his original injury. She tested reflexes, sensation, muscle strength, and nerve conduction with the precision of a scientist investigating a phenomenon that challenged everything she understood about spinal cord injuries. "This is remarkable," she said finally. "You're demonstrating voluntary motor control and sensation below your injury level that simply shouldn't exist with a complete T12 injury." "Because it's not a complete injury," Keisha said quietly. "It never was. The initial assessment was based on trauma presentation, not on careful evaluation of preserved neural function." Dr. Chen turned to study Keisha with new interest. "What are your qualifications for making that assessment?" Keisha calmly recited her credentials, her degrees, her research focus, her experience with similar cases. As she spoke, Dr. Chen's expression changed from suspicion to grudging respect. "Your approach is unconventional," Dr. Chen said finally. "Conventional approaches weren't working," Keisha replied. Marcus's father, who had been silent throughout the demonstration and examination, finally spoke. "Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, is this progress sustainable? Can Marcus continue to improve?" Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Based on what I've seen today, Mr. Whitmore has more recovery potential than anyone anticipated. With appropriate therapy, continued improvement is not only possible, but likely." She turned to Keisha. "Ms. Washington, I'd like to discuss your methods in detail. If you're achieving results like this, other patients could benefit from your approach." The meeting that had been intended to shut down Marcus's therapy instead became a planning session for expanding it. Dr. Chen agreed to oversee Marcus's continued care while incorporating Keisha's methods. Dr. Morris, faced with undeniable evidence of improvement, reluctantly agreed to modify her conservative approach. Most importantly, Marcus's father finally understood that his son's recovery was not only possible, but already in progress. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the podium of the International Spinal Cord Injury Conference, addressing an audience of doctors, therapists, and researchers. He had walked to the podium, slowly with the aid of forearm crutches, but under his own power. "Recovery is not always possible," he told the audience, "but it's more possible than we often assume. Sometimes the difference between disability and ability is having someone who refuses to accept limitations as final answers." In the audience, Keisha Washington smiled as she took notes for the research paper they were co-authoring about unconventional approaches to spinal cord rehabilitation. She had left her job as a maid 6 months earlier to become Marcus's full-time therapist and research partner. Together, they were working to help other patients achieve recoveries that the medical establishment had deemed impossible. The story of the rich man who couldn't walk and the maid who helped him stand had become something much larger, a testament to the power of recognizing potential in unexpected places and refusing to accept that anyone's limitations are necessarily permanent. Marcus still used his wheelchair for long distances and tiring days. He might never run or ski or dance the way he had before his accident. But he had reclaimed something more valuable than perfect mobility. He had reclaimed hope, purpose, and the belief that his best days were still ahead of him. And it had all started with a woman who cleaned bathrooms but saw possibilities that million-dollar specialists had missed. A woman whose qualifications mattered less than her vision, whose skin color mattered less than her character, and whose job title mattered less than her willingness to believe in recovery when everyone else had given up. In the end, the most important lesson wasn't about spinal cord injuries or rehabilitation techniques. It was about the dangerous assumptions people make based on appearances, credentials, and social position. Sometimes the person who can change your life is the one you least expect. working in a role that doesn't reflect their true capabilities, waiting for someone to ask the right questions and give them the chance to show what they can really do. Marcus had learned that lesson the hard way, but he had learned it in time. And in learning it, he had discovered not just the ability to walk again, but the ability to see people for who they truly were, rather than for what the world assumed them to be.